Howdy folks, welcome to another episode of the Riflechair Adventure Channel. Howdy folks, how are you? Riflechair here. And yes, I'm hunting. So, out in a fairly remote, austere location, wall tenting it with two fantastic people. Because those are the kinds of people you want to take hunting with you. And I was just reminded last night of something that, a lesson that I learned when I was probably 15, 16 years old. And it has to do with choosing a safe location to set up your camp. When I was 15 to 16 years old, I was involved in the Boy Scouts. I was in the Venturers, Boy Scouts, Rovers. And I think a lot of who I am today kind of was born back then. And thanks to Scouts Canada. And one of the things that I learned, we would go on troop camps and whatnot, but when I got to Venturers, we started getting into the teenage years, and we didn't need Scouts to go camping. We would just go do it on our own. Or so we thought. And we went to a place called Coho Flats down by the river. Massive riparian area, giant Sitka spruce, and giant western red cedars. And we were out having a good time. It was a beautiful summer evening. Nighttime hits us, and it's time to hit the tent. No, these are all hiking camps. And one hell of a windstorm came up that night, and you could hear trees creaking and limbs busting off. And then there was a massive crack, and right next to our camp, a western red cedar about 2 meters in diameter broke in half. The top half came crashing down. You can imagine what that psychologically can do to a person when they suddenly realize that this might be the moment I die. Right? Thankfully, it crashed right next to our camp, not in the camp, but right next to it. The next morning, we went and investigated it, and it was uncomfortably close. So here we are, many years later, and ran into a similar circumstance. Except this time, the camping scenario was looked at a little bit closer for safety considerations and what we could do to mitigate any hazards. The original location we were going to camp was on a small island with a little bridge to the mainland. It's up fairly nice and high so we can see down into a swamp. And got there to recce the area, and it is a sea of snags, pine trees. And this area was hit, a long time ago by a mountain pine beetle. And all the lodgepole pine around here is big diameter, and it's all dead. All dead. A couple of straggler, small diameter pine that weren't killed, but all of the big trees are dead for mountain pine beetle, which is a bark beetle. And they have a blue stain, it's a blue fungus, and it pretty much kills the tree off in about 3 to 4 years. And these things have been sitting dead on the stump now for at least 5, 6, 7 years. And they're highly decomposed. A sea of snags. I'll roll some footage in. Sorry, it's really pissing rain today. But I'm taking refuge under a spruce tree here to get out of the rain. Anyway, so we were supposed to camp in that sea of snags. And I'm subconsciously remembering that experience when I was 15, 16 years old. I ain't going back there if I can help it. And so we did an area recce of this entire bay, all the different shorelines. And I found this spruce type, dominated by spruce, very, very minor pine, but it's tiny component of it, dominated by spruce, as you can probably see around me. This is all spruce. And it is green. Very, very few snags. There are some. And so we put our camp here on the high ground, not too far from where the original location was. But last night, let me tell you, there was a problem. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, it started to rain. Serious rain. It was coming down in buckets. The wall tent, it was really loud. The canvas roof in the wall tent was just getting pelted by these huge raindrops. High volume of water coming down. And I actually had to go out and bail out the boat because we're at a fairly remote location, and our only way out of here is using that boat. We have to secure the boat, always. And so I did that, and the rain was just coming down. And got back to the tent, took off all the rain gear, flashed up the wood stove, and started drying out the gear, and fell asleep. And when I woke up, the rain had stopped, and the wind had picked up, and you could hear it coming. It's like a roar, you know, as it gets closer, it gets louder, and you can hear the trees starting to sway back and forth. Creak! And your imagination starts to run away on you. As to worsening what your situation might be, but when you start getting those kinds of thoughts in your head, you really should be paying attention to them. Anyway, I had recce'd this area. There are some snags, but they're pretty recent snags. You know, the roots are solid, the stems are solid, the crowns are still intact, the fine twigs and needles are still present. So, fairly solid snags. Okay? And I didn't think they would be much of a safety hazard to us, and I was correct. None of them came down. But as that wind started picking up, all the pine stands, we're in a little pocket of spruce, and all the way around us is pine, right? So we're in this little spruce area. All around us were surrounded by pine, and I counted 15, 16 trees that came down, and it was scary. It was scary. And, anyway, site location. Mitigating safety hazards. Walk around your campsite and actually go do an area reconnaissance of your campsite. Extend yourself out 2 to 3 tree lengths in all directions and try to find hazards. Are there any trees leaning towards your tent location? Are they dead? How many snags do you have? How firm do they look? If you were to chop into it, would you get nothing but a thud, or would you get a nice hard crack because the wood is still solid? These are all safety considerations that could save your life, and will save your life one day if you pay attention to them. I got another J root here. So I mean, this tree was absolutely hammered, and didn't really stand a chance. The deal is what the mountain pine beetle like to do is they like to hit large diameter trees with thick bark. I'll talk to you here. So they'll hit these large diameter pine with thick bark, and they do that because when the temperature drops, and it drops minus 30, 40, 50 below zero Celsius centigrade over here, they need that thick bark to act as kind of an insulating layer. Now, depending on how fast we have the cold onset, or an early frost, or a deep freeze, if these insects are in a light bark tree, say like a younger small diameter pine, the bark is just not as thick. It doesn't provide them with enough insulation value, and they freeze. When you get a cold snap freeze, and they die. Now, mountain pine beetle are very interesting in that they're able to basically procure their own antifreeze, an ethylene glycol, which helps to supplement they work it into their blood somehow, and they actually do become, after a certain period of time, when they've been able to harden off and get ready for winter, they are impervious, pretty much almost impervious to freezing. So if you get a really cold, early, nice snap, intense cold, they will kill the mountain pine beetle off. But if you're having warm, mild winters like we have been, then they don't die off. They just continue to explode in growth, and you end up with this huge, massive dead forest in the interior of British Columbia. I'll give you some shots so you can see where we are, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions on whether you think a place like this is safe to camp in. So the mountain pine beetle came into the interior of BC quite a while ago now, and these trees have been dead on the stump for quite a long time. Examine the crowns of these trees and you'll notice that most of the fine twigs, like the needles, they've died off a long time ago. Some of them more recent attack, but some of the older ones, the old attack, this happened quite some time ago, and these trees are highly decomposed. Very little in the way of merchantable volume left in these trees. They're just too full of sap rot. Now, you're going to put a tent under this. What if the wind starts to pick up? Bad idea, isn't it? This is essentially dead forest. You'll see some smaller living pine here. They're there because they have very small diameters, very thin bark. There are a couple of pitch tubes on them, but and some of them were successfully, they got underneath, but they just weren't able to survive the winter. And you'll see there's a tree there, it snapped off, totally snapped right off. Now, so I've shown you some of these trees. We'll look at this tree here with that's been pushed over, blow down. Roots came out from underneath it, lots of rot. We'll show you this stump in just a second, but I'm recommending that you don't camp in these areas, because you can't control things like the weather and wind and whatnot. When you're in it, you're in it. You've got trees coming down around you, you better run for an opening, or at least have one that's nearby. Whether it's a field or some rangeland or some farmland that's around you, you have to egress from the hazard area into a safe area. So I mean, if you're going to be in and around these forests, I recommend you camp either in a different timber type, so for example a pure spruce patch or something like that, right? That has not got these dead trees all around you, leaning towards your campsite or towards your tent. Or you camp out in the open on pasture land or grasslands or something to that effect, so you're camping outside of the dead forest. Don't camp inside the dead forest. Alright, so let's look at this. I mean honestly, we can't see in our houses. We got to get out and do stuff, right? Just keep in mind that there's a danger area to camp and there's a safe area to camp. Right, so here's a pine tree. This root wad actually went over not too long ago. And here we have our what's remaining of our root systems, which are totally decomposed. There's nothing holding this tree. Look at this, just laminated rot in these roots. And all of the fine root tips have been long died and rotted away. These fine roots that you see here are probably from woody vegetation on the forest floor, like this common rose. There's rose hip all over the place here and willow. But this tree has been dead standing for a long time. This was killed by a mountain pine beetle, this pine tree, and it's pretty commonplace. In fact, I would say most of the trees around this area that have fallen over, only about 50% of them were fallen over because of the highly decomposed roots. Most of them, or at least half of them, are because of breakage, like this one right here, snapping just above the root. And the tree is torquing back and forth like this, and something's going to eventually go. In super saturated wet conditions, it might be the roots that go, like really super wet days, where it's been pounding rain for days. But when the roots in the ground are dry, it's probably breakage that is the predominant factor that's having these trees coming down. So with a mindset of ensuring safety for your crew, yourself, and your family, please take my recommendation, which is to avoid camping in BC's interior forests. Now rec sites have all been swept for danger trees. Our forest recreation sites, so don't let this phenomenon prevent you from coming out to BC's interior forests. They're incredible. They're absolutely incredible. When you're living in a dead forest, or if you're working in a dead forest, you'll see all kinds of different kind of creatures out here. Just the number of woodpeckers is incredible. Pileated and all kinds of different woodpeckers that are out here. Cavity den nesting birds are doing very well, and because of this mountain pine beetle. So, food for thought, folks. Hope you're all doing well. Cheers, and as always, maple leaf up.